Good morning. When I don't know if you remember, when I shared last time, I read some letters from Keris to myself. And I said to you, there's no way I'll read 78. Just to show that my nervousness in writing to Keris changed. Hi, wonderful. Let me start by saying the most important thing. Are you ready? Here we go. I love you. It's true, I do love you so much. Sometimes, like now, I haven't got much to tell you about because I told you everything on the phone last night. But it doesn't really matter because I can just tell you how much I do love you. You really do mean so much to me. One day soon you are going to be my wife, so I can be with you all the time for the rest of our lives. That's a certainty. We are going to get married, full stop. That is where I'd moved to. Keris's response they've got, I believe, on the screen. But I was a bit nervous about reading it. That's just a joke, it's all right. But something of the passion of God I referred to in these letters. And if we can just focus on the band, if you can be ready, we'll do that song. I just want us to spend just a couple of minutes just singing a song back to God, which really focuses on Him. And it's the hymn, When I Survey the Wondrous Cross. Love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all. We're on this, as you're aware, we're on this season of knowing God. And the question that came to me was, what is the cost of knowing God? And there's our answer. My soul, my life, my all. But we're, as His people, we're subject to kingdom economics. Worldly economics says if I've given it all away, I have nothing. Kingdom economics says if you give it all away, you have everything. In Matthew, it says if you try to hang on to your life, you'll lose it. But if you give it up, you will save it. And that's so the way the kingdom works. Grace is free, but it cost everything. God gave His very Son, but He had multiple sons in return. A generous heart is a precursor to abundant blessing, where normally we might see, well, give me lots of money and then I'll give it away. But God's approach is, be faithful with what you have, and I'll bless you, and I'll multiply you. God honors the secret, the unknown, the unrecognized. But in heaven, they're known, they're declared, they're championed. That's the way He is. But I think this whole thing of what I was aware of when I was just considering this, the cost of knowing God, for me to give everything away, I kind of thought, but what really is it that I hang on to? And see, God has blessed me. God has blessed you. God has brought us into sonship with Him. We have everything we need for life and godliness. Ourselves have died to sin, but somehow we seem to keep hold of some things. Those things that we need to give over to Him. That's what God's after from us, is two things. One, our total heart and our total surrender to Him. But also those things that He knows doesn't do us any good anyway. That's why I think it's so important, and I know we champion it in the church, the restoring of the foundations, keys to freedom, sozo, inner healing, all of those things to bring to bear those things which are perhaps hidden, those things that God says, a Holy Spirit might highlight and say, I'll have that. But it's not that I'm left with lack when He takes it away, but He just pours in blessing, freedom, grace, abundance. Again, that's kingdom economics. What is it I want to hold on to? Because I found that just in different things in life, certain things happen. So I would be perhaps with Keris and I driving in the car, and she may make reference to one or two things, and I'm starting to feel a bit uncomfortable with that and getting defensive. But it makes me realize actually all that's happening is that I'm still holding on to something of pride in that area, and I just need to let it go. And that's the way God is to us. He will just come to us and say, son, let go of this. This is not doing you any good. You know, my attitude might be, I want some more time for myself, just for me. I'm not talking about times that we have with God, but things that look in with me, just fill me up. But those things actually don't bring me fulfillment. It might appear to be in an instant, but it's not something which brings me release. What God gives us and what God exchanged with us is things which transform us. So his exchange is beauty, as it says in Isaiah, beauty for ashes, oil of joy for mourning, garment of praise for a spirit of heaviness. That's the way he is. That's the exchange. So in me giving my all to him, what I may give is my heart of worship and everything that I have, but I also release to him those things which perhaps I might have kept by. And usually those will be, they may well be hidden by pride or shame, and so it tends to hide it away. But God says, let it go to me, son. Let it go to me, daughter. For I will replace in you those things which are of him. So there's things which are not really part of us. He takes away and says, have my blessing, have my abundance, have my joy, have my freedom. That's the exchange that we have. You know, we'll feel far more fulfilled when we do things not for ourselves, but just for him and just for others. One of the things that we found in growing up, Keris and myself with our girls, is that some people were a bit surprised at the things that we did with them. It was like, I would never do that. I could never do that. So, I mean, I like roller coasters, but Keris was okay with them, but we would just go and do stuff with the girls. We would choose to do things that they wanted to do. And it wasn't that they ruled the home, but we knew that in getting our peace and our satisfaction, it was out of fulfilling their needs, looking after them. So our approach was, what can we do for you? And I'm sure you understand that as parents all the time. Our heart is just to give and give and give. And whatever it is, whether it's time, whether it's money, whether it's just emotional support with them, whatever it is, our heart is to give. And in giving, we actually find fulfillment. So what is the evidence then of us knowing God? One of them is that I want to spend more time with him and he with me. And I think I always thought that time with God involved me on my knees in a quiet room, in a quiet place, being very purposeful about that. And that is true. But I was once out to one of those races. I do love that. The petrol, the noise, I love it. And I was sitting in the grandstand, and these things are whizzing by. There's about 40 of them, huge, great big engines. I can't really do it justice. You'll either understand me or you just think you're mad. It'll be one of the two. But just as these things were flying past and the noise was going past, I started to weep. And you've got guys in the grandstand. It's not the coolest place to weep. And I just wept and wept and wept because what I realized is that God was sitting there right alongside me saying, this is great, isn't it? This is fun, this is it. And he made it clear, I'm at home with you here as much as I am in your study on your own. And that just moved me. I think, God, you're there all of the time. There is no special time. The whole time, your whole life is just with him. And just being aware of him, he just loves those things that you love doing. And so if there's things that you have, I know Cara last week was talking about having times for the soul, things that you love doing. Be aware, God's there with you. That's part of knowing him as comfortable as in here, at times when you're on your own at home, maybe in your closet praying, but also just doing the things that you love doing. One of the other evidence of it is this: my perception changes because the Spirit reveals who the Father is and how he thinks about me, and that changes how I think about other things. I know for ourselves, we're involved in a church in Leicester, and I had a problem with the leader. He was a bit arrogant. At least that was my opinion. Maybe that was arrogance in itself, but there was a sense there that I don't really like this guy, and everything that he does winds me up, and he doesn't do this, and he doesn't do that, and he doesn't do the other. And I was really challenged to see him how God sees him. And you know what? When that happened, he changed amazingly. It was incredible. This guy who was annoying and frustrating and arrogant was no longer that at all. He was loving, he was kind, he was gentle, he was considerate. Maybe he did, or maybe God changed my heart towards him. But I believe that's the power of what will happen when we change our perspective of things. Situations can stay the same in the facts, but the way we look at them, the way that we interact them, the way that we bring God into those situations is totally transformed. But it's only by him, and it's only as a result of my understanding and my revelation of who he is, because that affects how I see everything else. Another evidence then of us knowing God is that we love one another. And God really pressed this on me as I was spending time just before him. In John 13, Jesus says, "So now I am giving you a new commandment. Love each other just as I have loved you. You should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples." So it's out of our knowledge of him that brings a love for one another that lets other people see what our Father is really like. It's a demonstration of who he is. And you know, what I think about and what I believe God thinks about me will affect what I think about you. See, if I see God, or if God to me is somebody who's a loving Father who loves me, who cares for me, who's kind, who's patient, who wants the best for me, when I see that, it affects the way I see you, and it affects what I do, how I speak to you, how I keep a pure motive. And I think this is important for all of us, is that we continue as we are doing to pursue God, to see him for ourselves, but so that we will see each other how God sees us. Because we wouldn't say half the things or do half the things that we do if we saw each other as how God sees us. See, I'm conscious that I'm quite moved by, I think we can all be, by images on the TV, whether it be something like Mozambique, or for me it's children that have suffered neglect in some way. It really gets to me. But I thought there's some things that I see on the TV which I am more moved by than I am things which occur in people around me. Because I don't know what it is, there's just a distance there, but I felt challenged. Actually, God, give me a heart for the people around me. Let me be affected. Let me care about them. God, cause there to be a compassion in me, but that compassion has to come out, as I think Josh brought about. That compassion comes out of a gratitude and a knowing God. But that's what I want to do. That's what God has called us to do. That we'll love one another by being connected. In Hebrews 10:23, it says, "So now we must cling tight to the hope that lies within us, knowing that God always keeps his promise. Discover creative ways to encourage one another and to motivate one another towards acts of compassion, doing beautiful works as expressions of love. This is not the time to pull away and neglect meeting together, as some have formed the habit of doing, because we need each other. In fact, we should come together even more frequently, eager to encourage and each other onward as we anticipate the day dawning." You know, I think Josh mentioned this, Joshua, we are the most connected generation with technology and the most disconnected in relationship. Something that I'm being aware of and I just want to explore is that we have a generation of anxiety, depression, loneliness. That is what's there. You know, I show you a meal on my phone rather than have one with you. I'll show you what I'm about to eat, rather than saying, come on, let's go out for something to eat. And there's that disconnection that's happened. The average time a person spends on social media is the 135 minutes, 2 hours, 15 minutes a day. That's a lot. That's a lot of connection time with those around, but not a connection time with those in front. And God's called us to do that. That's not in any way to put that down. I know those tools are fantastic for people, for families, for connecting in ways, as long as it doesn't become a substitute for the connection face to face. Because that's how God is with us. He wants a connection face to face. And if we're to represent him, that's what he's called us to do, face to face, one another. We've said our mission is that we are a radical and relevant church that empowers people to express God's heart, to fulfill their dreams and change the world. If we're to be a relevant church right now, one of the greatest relevances that we can be, if that's a word, is to offer relationship and experience connection. That's where we express God's heart, through connecting with people, through being with people, through being with one another, expressing of God's heart to one another, that the world can see, what is it about those guys? I want in on this. I want in on this reality of what's going on there. What is it that you've got? And like Jesus has said, it's through our connection and our love for one another that others know and recognize and see him as he is. So we're a demonstration of his relationship with us. I would encourage you for those who are, if you like, on the periphery to get connected. I believe we have, we do have life groups. But there are other people around. Don't be isolated. It's just not good for you. I was chatting with Simon last week, and he was saying that, correct me if I'm wrong, in studies it proved that actually connection for people was good for their health, good for their well-being, whatever that connection was. Is that right? So don't be isolated. I think we may say, is this a friendly church? Or is this not a friendly church? Or isn't it friendly? If you don't feel it is, then make it. See, I'm believe it or not, I'm quite a shy person. And my default is to come in, not say anything to anybody and go away. And I'd be quite comfortable with that. But I realized, whilst that is in my default nature, that doesn't represent God. And it's not that I'm wrong and I beat myself up about it, but I will purposely go for those predominantly who are sitting on their own. So if you're sitting on your own, I'll probably come across you at some point. Just to connect with those people. And so I'd encourage us as a family, just as naturally, if there's people on their own, make a connection with them. And if you're on your own, make a connection with others who are on their own. Because that is a representative of what family life is like. We just share with one another. We connect with one another. So can I encourage you to do that? And if you're really uncomfortable with it, I just want to say get over it, but that's really harsh. And I don't mean that. What I mean is understand how he thinks about those people. Does God want somebody to walk in here, not encounter anybody or him and leave without any of that? No, he wants us to encounter him and encounter one another. That's God's plan and purpose for us. The fourth thing that I've got that is evidence of us knowing God is that we are changed. Which means we choose it, we allow it, and we persevere with it. Because things like this don't happen overnight. Things like this, or changes that occur in our life, are very few and far between, you'll find. We are the same, we mature and we change. But particularly once we reach adulthood, things don't change necessarily a great deal. But God's work in us is to change us, is to transform us, is to take us from a place where we're living in glory to a greater degree of glory. But it does require perseverance, and because time's gone, I'm not going to go into that very much. I had something to say, particularly about the parable of the sower, but I'll come back to that another time. But I believe God's heart for us is that we be a people who persevere and war over words that God's given to us. You see, I was just challenged by all of the things that we've had so far. So we had Dan, who laid out the whole, if you like, overview of knowing God, of being strong, of doing great. Joshua talking about being home alone, finding God in solitude. Nigel, it's all about connection. Janine, knowing God through disappointment. Tim Rudge, a time of just focusing on God. Myself, on purpose, passion, promise. And so it went on. Dan, again, about standing up, keep listening. Mike, about really just passion of knowing God. Joshua, again, what's in your pocket and space for the soul. Lots and lots and lots of word we've heard. And I believe the challenge is, what are we doing in this season? Not in any way to put anybody down, but I would encourage you, go before God. What is it that he is specifically bringing for you? Because God will give us each a specific word if we ask him. There'll be some area he wants to take something away and replace it with something of who he is. Let's just go, I would encourage you, for one thing. We're 12 weeks in, 10 weeks in. So there's been at least 10 or 12 messages. They're there on the podcast. As I say, we're in a time where we have availability to these resources. I would encourage you, in the times that you have, go and listen to the podcast again. What is it, God? Quicken things that will cause us to go after. It may be prayer. It may be just in how we worship. It may be attitude. It may be things of a relationship. It may be things that we need to adjust in our work or in our family. But I would encourage us to open our heart to God, understand what the Holy Spirit is saying to us through knowing God, retain it, persevere with it, and see a great harvest to happen. But it all begins with a revelation of him. That's why I wanted us just to sing that song, that everything comes from a context of knowing God that just says, Lord, here I am. You have all of me. You're worth all of me. That is like God's heart for us. And I believe if we do that, we will be a transformed people. We'll be a people who are ready in knowing God, being ready to grow in God and to go in God. God bless you all.